Hello and welcome. Today we're going to focus on the question of the metaphysics behind science. Science is often seen as something that is very objective, as a pursuit of truth, which cannot really establish truth as like medieval metaphysics would claim to do, but is there to approximate, to get closer, if not ever reaching it, but to keep approximating and getting closer to the truth. It is seen that the scientific method is something that has a universal similarity across all disciplines, and that applying this method is the way to arrive at something that we can approximate truth with. So, what is the difference between classical metaphysics and the metaphysics underlying science? Now, in classical metaphysics, there is the notion of some sort of ideal absolute truth, which was often bound, especially when talking about medieval scholasticism, bound to some fundamental universal theology about the nature of the world and God in the world. So we're assuming there is a certain truth. There's a certain truth, which I'll denote with T, which has been given to us by divine providence, which has been given to us by scripture, which is written down, set in stone, and eternally true. And beginning from that truth, claims about the ideal truth of the world can be derived and can lead to what would, in medieval scholastic view, be seen as science. So science was truly one coherent field which derived itself from the same common truth. So the actual approach to science wasn't too different from what we consider science now. It is often a misconception that the scholastics or the medieval kind of theology-based philosophy was merely based on superstition and wanted to reject any forms of science. No, it was mainly based on the view that looking at the phenomenal world, looking at the empirical world, was prone to error, because things could happen that were exceptions, that were unlikely. Our senses could be illusioned, our senses could be mistaken. And so in order to arrive at truth, it had to be derived by pure reason. It had to be derived from the eternal truth which pure reason can access. That is the truth of the ultimate reason, of God. And then be derived from that subsequently. So you could call it a top-down approach, as opposed to modern science kind of claiming for itself more of a bottom-up approach. There's, of course, notable exceptions in pure mathematics or theoretical physics where they do attempt to have some sort of top-down theory of everything. But it is kind of telling that that theory of everything seems to not really progress, seems to not really come along thus far. Because the theory of everything does not make a claim as the ultimate theology of God did. So it's hard to have a theory of everything which at the same time is limited to only, let's say, particle physics, or let's say particular fields of physical interactions. So the misconception there was that someone like Galilei, who would have gotten into a feud with the church, would have gotten into the feud with the kind of then systems of truth, wasn't in a feud because they had never heard of science and he invented it in that way. It was more a paradigm shift. It was more something where the established way of science, the scientific establishment, if you will, was changed, was shifted, because with Galilei and his contemporaries, a kind of new mode of applying science, a new methodology was introduced which appeared to be more powerful and lead to stronger results. And that stronger results, that kind of trajectory and focus, has become the other big T, and that is technology. So one could never justify the superiority of a certain other methodology without replacing that strong kind of core that the last metaphysics had. So the new metaphysics seems to be technological in nature. People would call it materialistic, which is not entirely false depending on how you define materialism or physicalism, or there's many different names for it. People say that this materialism has already been questioned by modern science through discoveries like quantum mechanics. But what has remained is the sort of technological rationality of the scientific research, because it seems that science kind of obtains its grip, its strength through the further expansion and growth of the techno-scientific system. What this means is that it is actually not possible to point at a certain paradigm that you could fully list and then you have the definition of science. For example, falsificationism was brought forward by Karl Popper, who would claim that a scientific research is that research which can be disproven. So scientific truth is merely models and theories that have not been disproven yet. So, as it's not possible to derive a theory from mere lists of empirical facts, it was said that you needed some sort of metaphysical core, some sort of non-provable, disprovable core for your theory, but it had to be confined, demarcated, in such a way that the theory as such was still falsifiable. That you could still say the theory is true on the basis of it has not been disproven yet, as of now. So the interesting part here is you've got these two dynamics of two of the most important theorists of science. You've got Kuhn's paradigm shift, where you had the major paradigm shift from theos to technos, right? Or techne, not a Greek expert. And you've got the second big theorist of science, which is Karl Popper, who talked about falsificationism, focusing on the induction problem of trying to string together a theory through a list of empirical claims, and the demarcation problem of how much metaphysics is permitted. Then you've got the third big theorist of science, whose name was Paul Feyerabend, who was seen as a sort of epistemic anarchist, meaning that he claimed there is no foundational metaphysical truth behind science, and every discipline has its own methodology and its own, let's say, subjective means of justifying their truth. So even if you had some sort of, let's say, questionable religious practice or something like astrology, there would be a realm in which that would be justifiably an approach to truth, a scientific claim, and the only difference that you'd have in like a theory of modern physics would be not that it's more true, but that it is more capable of providing for techniques, and that power that it can set free, that power it can create, is what gives it its strength, what gives it its believability, what evokes that sort of bias that it is considered more truthful. Now, this does not mean that truth doesn't exist, does not mean that science is entirely subjective. It, however, means that science seems to have gone into a sort of self-driven system of which we've lost the sense of what its telos, what its goal is, and whether that goal really is truth, and whether that particular truth that lies in the technical rationality is a truth that is at all friendly or not friendly or hostile even towards human life. I hope I've given you something to think about, and I hope this was kind of understandable, and I'll see you next time.